Now let's move to the first speech talking about climate change. I would like to invite my colleague Carlo Cacciamani. He will talk about climate change and the policies adopted in Emilia-Romagna. Thank you. Good morning. Okay, I will keep my mask on. Good morning, and thank you very much for your invitation and for this important project. I would like to thank you for the involvement of the Arpae agency, which is the climate environmental agency in the Emilia-Romagna region. We created this agency to control our climate ecosystem, both for what happened until today and for the creation of future climate perspective. I would like to talk about this issue. So it's a very simple presentation. We will focus on what we have observed until today and what we are expecting for the future. So the climate change is not a global topic, but it's also a local issue. And climate change is not just a scientific topic, but it's something that is wider, that it has effects on people's life, on the next generations, and their life depends on what we can organize for all of them in the future. Some remarks. So this is an observatory, a climate observatory, because the Emilia-Romagna region adopts its own strategy of mitigation and adaptation for climate change. There is a regional forum. There are some action plans for sustainable energy and climate. There is a metropolitan plan. For example, we have a plan for Bologna, and there are some general urban plans and some municipal adaptation plans. For example, in the region, apart from Bologna, which adopted this plan, there are other cities like Reggio Emilia and even other cities which use the observation taken by our observatory in order to develop their own action plans. A couple of words on the climate study. We need to collect studies, we need to collect historical information, because there is a difference in the weather and the climate. Weather is what you observe by looking outside the window. The climate cannot be observed out of the window, because it's a statistical property. It's what you expect to have. So when you talk about climate change, you talk about a potential change in what you expect. So our wardrobe depends on climate, not on weather, just to make a distinction. And we created every year a climate atlas of Emilia-Romagna. Over the last days, we produced the last version for last year, and it represents in a schematical way the climate situation in our region. And we drafted tables, diagrams, data processing, and this is the scientific language representing this situation. So there is an hydroclimate report To do so, we should have a monitoring system that is really hard to keep, because all weather data taken from weather stations must be controlled. They can be defective at some times, so you need to be sure that the data collected is good data. Otherwise, the climate indicators are not fully representative of the real situation. Observed climate. You see a comparison in these graphs of the global situation in the world. You see the different diagrams and the situation in our region, in our country. What you can spot in a very clear way is that if we consider the trend from the 60s until today, the first 20 years from the 60s to the 80s, the region climate remained stable. Here you see a change in temperature, so it means that the difference in the temperature of a specific year, and then there is the deduction of the average temperature over 30 years. So if this anomaly is close to zero, it means that the climate of that year is close to the climate study. Otherwise, if it is far away from the average, it means that there is a variation. So starting from the 80s, there has been a peak in temperatures. So starting from the 60s, there is no year that is colder compared to what happened in the first 20 years. So we are already living in a modified climate situation for many reasons. The first time is that, considering the rapidity in this change, reasons are anthropocentric, so they are linked to the human presence, because we increase the greenhouse gases. There is a higher release in the atmosphere, carbon emissions. So this creates a heat surplus of energy coming to the Earth. On the one side, this is good because we can have an average temperature around 15 degrees and not minus 20. Unfortunately, this greenhouse effect got bigger and bigger in a very quick way, so in an unsustainable way, even to be able to react to these conditions. Just to show you some indicators, this is the hydroclimate balance, so the difference between rain and evaporation. So you see, for example, bottom right, you see some columns, the blue ones, this is a positive data. So it rains more than the evaporation in Emilia-Romagna. So 25, 30 years, over the last 30 years, we have more red columns and yellow. So it means that there is a higher evaporation compared to rain. So even if the rain did not modify their percentage, but since the temperature got higher and higher, soils lose water, so there is this evaporation effect, and therefore this decreases the content in water. So we, in Emilia-Romagna, could run the risk of having a desertification problem. So here you see in red evaporation, the blue lines rains. So you see there is there are peak ups and downs in rain, but you see the increase in the temperature. And the difference between these two elements, you have this graph on the right. And over the last year, we had negative peaks. So it means that we had a magnification of this effect. So by having a decrease in water content, what is the impact on agriculture, for example, or in water management, water resource management? So just, figure out how these two aspects can be so important. So impacts are recorded everywhere in the world at European, Mediterranean level. In the Mediterranean region where we live is highly at risk, and it is called a hot spot at global level, and even some uncertainties for what is going to be in the future, so reduced compared to other regions in the world. So what we can expect in this area, so hotter summers and less rain, but this does not mean less extreme events, because it's almost a paradox. But ironically, and this is a peculiar characteristic of the Mediterranean area that is not visible in Northern Europe countries. So if we have a reduction in rain, in particular during summers, when it's going to rain in a very robust and quick way. So, for example, with the flash flood effect, and so hydrological problems. I always repeat this, so less rain, but when it rains more. This is kind of a pun on words, but that's the reality. And so water resources, if I had to say one thing, water can represent the problem number one. We cannot live without water. We can live without petrol. We cannot live without water. So this is a problem that is really strong, for example, in the migration origin countries. And climate change maybe is not the cause, but is one of the causes, increasing the issues in that area. They increase the conflict situation, because if such an important resource, decreases in quantity, then you have the emergence of conflicts, and so therefore they cause population to flee these areas, and they are linked in our regions with conflicts in front of a judge in court, because you would like to have all the water for yourself, but then there is a governance that must be ensured. Unfortunately, when there is diminish resources, then the conflictual situation might increase. This is not Oklahoma. This is close to Modena. A tornado F3 size, not only in Emilia-Romagna, it hit other Italian regions, 30 million euros of damages. So just to give you an idea, strong wind, trucks were just elevated and, thrown away. I went to this area after the tornado and I was shocked. So just one event. Of course, we cannot say climate change is this event, but when you have an increase in this number of events, and then of course you have to start wondering that maybe something is happening at climate level. So we had river floods. This is the Parma flood dating back to 2014. After 1 year, we had another flood in the Nura River. So very, very rapid and intense rain. And then we said water management. We had different drought situation over the last decade. This was, for example, the situation in agriculture, crops damaged. The situation was repeated in 2017. Then in 2019, the situation went slightly better because it started to rain. But you have floods on the one side caused by intense events, a drought caused by lack in rainfall and an increase in temperature causing evaporation, and then you have drought. If this situation is repeated, and unfortunately we think there will be more events, we will have problems. So, and I'm concluding by thinking about the future. In order to carry out some analysis for the future, we have to monitor this phenomenon, cryosphere, biosphere as well, because the climate system is complex and it's made up by all these subsystems interacting the one with the other by exchanging energy and mass. So, to depict future scenarios, we have to simulate the behavior of these systems, and by analyzing some forcing, they are, for example, the greenhouse gases. So we can include in the simulation models different levels of GHG releases depending on the different economic scenarios that the world is going to set up. And then you have the Paris Treaty and then Kyoto Treaty and so on and so forth. So all these responses from an economic point of view and a decision-making point of view has a counterparty in pollution, in GHG emissions, and you obtain different responses. If we include in our future model the so-called business as usual model, so we don't do anything, everything will continue like this. At the end of the century, there will be an increase in the Earth temperature by 5 degrees and not just 1 degree as it is expected in the Paris Treaty. But we have to commit ourselves. Every single player could be citizens, communities, industries. In particular, I would like to say in the Western countries that they largely cause this condition. It's not the African country which had a great impact on the carbon emissions. It's more due to the industrialized countries and then the emerging countries like China, for example. But we have to commit ourselves and to improve the situation. Of course, these scenarios representing the current climate, but with an expectation in the future, must also be adapted to our territory. And this is my last slide. I would like to show you what is our expectation in Emilia-Romagna. We are not referring to the worldwide situation. We are focusing on our region and, of course, a smaller scale. But the signal that we obtained is pretty clear. So over the period 2020-2050, we will have an increase in temperature compared to the climate 1970s-2000. You see the red bars are always higher compared to the blue bars. And this is a clear sign. In particular, over summer, the situation is pretty clear from a statistical point of view. You see on the right, you have the graph concerning rainfall, but during spring and summer, it might rain less, and so since temperature goes up and rain goes down, we will have the water resource management problems that were mentioned before with all the impact. So on the left you have the temperature Gauss curve of the climate as observed until today. So you have a peak and you have a temperature. You see the dotted curves are the future climate. So it represents the probability curve of temperature, and it's switching to the right, so shifting to the right. So over the 70s, and we might thought, of an exceptional heat, 38 degrees. Today, this temperature is a normal temperature. So what we judge today as normal, 25, 30 years ago, it was exceptional. And we have to understand this, because we have to live with a different climate. When I was 18, the climate was different, and my daughter, who is 26, has to deal with a different climate. So the behaviors leading my life at that time, of course, are different compared to the behaviors that our next generation is going to adopt. Thank you very much.
Grazie.
Thank you very much to Mr. Cacciamani for this comprehensive presentation, which underlined the importance of the environment in our cities. As you know, our project is called Shaping Fair Cities, so it aims at building inclusive societies. What do I mean? I mean that we aim at paying attention to people, first and foremost, then the environment, of course, and we aim at finding the right way to have a balance with the environment. We aim at paying attention to climate change as well. So thank you very much, Carlo, for this highly important presentation. Thank you once again.